We're loading the live stream now, and then I'll let you know when everybody's in.
Graham and Ian, just remember you're muted.
All right, everybody's in and we're ready to go.
Hello, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment as you filter in from the waiting room. Welcome. Hello, everyone. We're going to start this October edition of Philosophy in the Library. Welcome. Nice to see you all. My name is Joel Whitney. I'm part of the BPL Presents Arts and Culture presenting team at Brooklyn Public Library. It's a pleasure to host Graham Priest, who will be talking about Buddhism and science. This is a series that goes back years and years, even before my department got involved. It's curated and founded by Ian Olisoff, who I will introduce to you in a moment, and his team at Brooklyn Public Philosophers. I think it's a hardworking but not very sizable team, if I'm right about that. But in addition to these monthly events, and we're going to have something exciting to say about who's coming in November. I'll leave that to Ian if it's firm. But we do them monthly from October through the spring. We take a little break, usually in January, for Night of Philosophy. We're excited to tell you more about that soon, although we're not quite there yet. Going to do a sort of a hybrid version this coming winter, I think. But to follow us and to learn more about what we're doing, if you're new to BPL Presents, you can go to our social media or our website. Our website is bklynlibrary.org/BPL Presents, and BPL Presents is the handle for all of our social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. I should mention there's going to be a lecture of about 40-45 minutes, and then we want to hear from you. But in the meantime, I will warn you, if you're shy, camera shy, as you can see, this is being streamed live to the BPL Presents Facebook page. So fair warning to those of you who don't want to be on video. You could put your questions in the chat. Anyway, now I'm going to turn it over to Ian in a moment, but I just wanted to take a moment now to welcome you. And without any further ado, Ian, the floor is yours.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm coming at you live from Brooklyn College right now. I'm so glad that we are able to enter yet another season of Philosophy in the Library. Been running this since fall of 2013 for a little while now. I'm really excited that Graham Priest is joining us today. One of the things that I think people are sometimes dissatisfied by in academic philosophy is its sort of narrowness. There are certain ideas which are taken seriously and other ideas which aren't taken seriously. There are certain texts and traditions which are taken seriously and other ideas which are excluded. And Graham Priest has done as much as I think anybody on earth to expand the range of ideas which are taken seriously in logic and increasingly in Buddhist philosophy, and now I'm working on political philosophy. So I'm really glad that Graham is going to be joining us today. And without further ado, Graham, take it away. Oh, you're still muted.
Good. So let's start again. So thank you, Ian, for the kind introduction. Thank you to Ian and Joel and all the good folks at Brooklyn Public Library for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. It would have been fun to do this in person, but we live in strange times still. So we've all used to doing this kind of thing over the last 20 months. All right, I'm going to share my screen now. So hopefully you can see that.
Yep.
Except this isn't the way. Okay. So let me tell you what I want to talk about, and I'll try and keep this down to about 45 minutes, and then you can chip in and say whatever's on your mind. So the origin of Buddhism is relatively easy to date because it starts with the life of the historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama. The dates are uncertain, but it's maybe 5th century BCE, sometime around that. Dating the origin of science is much harder because people have been thinking about the nature of the physical and social world we live in since then or before then, and call that science if you want. But with the scientific revolution around the 17th century, science became a very different kettle of fish, partly because of the use of experimental techniques and not just observational techniques, partly with the application of mathematics. And the science since then has revealed to us a world which we could have had no guesses about before. We now understand the world a lot better than we did in the time of the Buddha, and a number of the applications of modern science have provided what could only have been magic to the Buddha. Flying, talking to people on the other side of the world, curing mortal diseases. We understand the world so much better now than then that we can just do a lot of things. All right. Now, the ancient world and the modern world don't always sit happily together. So because we know a lot more about the world than people did 2,500 years ago, we've learned that in fact a lot of views at that time are wrong. And not because the people were stupid, it's just that they didn't have another 2,500 years to find out about these things. But we know that a lot of ancient views are wrong. And so this raises a question for Buddhism. How well do the views of Buddhism stack up against modern science? And if we've learned that some of the views of Buddhism are wrong, what should a Buddhist say to this? So those are the issues I want to deal with. Before we actually get down to the nitty-gritty, let me give you one word of warning. Buddhism is not a single thing any more than Christianity is a single thing. So over its 2,500 year history, it's morphed through the Indian subcontinent, through the Chinese subcontinent, Japan, and now Buddhism is coming into the West. And there's no single school of Buddhism. There are many schools of Buddhism, and they're often really quite different. So the earliest form of Buddhism is Theravada, and now you find that in Southeast Asia, but that's quite different from the Tantric Buddhisms that you find in Tibet or Japan. And that's, again, absolutely different from Zen Buddhism that you also find in Japan. So it's silly to suppose, it's rather silly to talk about the Buddhist view on something. There are many Buddhist views on things, and Buddhists often disagree about this. So I'm not going to claim to be telling you the Buddhist view. I'm going to give you my take on things. I don't promise more than that. And I'll return to that subject briefly at the end of the talk. But with that word of warning, let's get down to details. So I want to start by talking about theism and Buddhism. You'll see why. And then we're going to run through some important Buddhist ideas. Anicca and Atman. If you don't know what those are, I'll tell you, don't worry. Rebirth, and dukkha and apeccika, and you'll see why those are relevant. So those are the Sanskrit terms. I'll explain them to you as we go along. So let's start with Buddhism and theism. Buddhism arose in India in about the 5th century BCE, and it arose against a background of the standard views of the time in Indian culture, which we now think of as Hinduism. And it rejected two central parts of Hinduism. In Hinduism, there is a godhead, Brahman, and individuals also have a soul, a self, if you want, Atman. In fact, the kind of standard Hindu view is that in some sense, Atman and Brahman are the same. We don't need to talk about what that means here. But Buddhism rejected both of these views. So Buddhism does not endorse the existence of a god, and it does not endorse the existence of a self or a soul. So the view that there's no self is an Atman, and we'll come back to that in a minute. But let's talk about the rejection of the existence of God. So in Buddhism, there is no all-powerful, all-knowing good God of the kind that you get in the Middle Eastern religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, or in Hinduism. Okay. Now, if there's no God, there can be no such thing as what is revealed by God. So in, for example, the Christian tradition, there is a distinction between natural theology and revealed theology. Revealed theology is what God tells you. Natural theology is what you can figure out for yourself. And some things you can figure out for yourself, but some things, the only way you have of knowing them is because God tells you. So in Buddhism, there can't be any such thing as revealed theology. And you're only left with the other bit, natural theology, what you can figure out for yourself. So the ground of Buddhism is really what you can figure out for yourself. Of course, you can take advice, but in the end, you've got to make your own mind up. And the Buddha was quite clear about this. So there's one of the Buddhist sutras called the Kalama Sutra, where the Buddha says this: do not go upon what has been acquired by repeated hearing, nor upon tradition, nor upon rumor, nor upon what is in a scripture, nor upon surmise, nor upon an axiom, nor upon specious reasoning, nor upon bias towards a notion that has been pondered over, nor upon another's seeming ability, nor upon the consideration that monk is our teacher. Kalamas, when you yourselves know these things are good, these things are not blamable, these things are praised by the wise, undertaken and observed, these things lead to benefit and happiness, enter on them and abide in them. So in other words, you shouldn't believe something just because some text says so or some spiritual leader says so. It's got to make sense to you. Okay, so of course, you can take the advice of experts. I mean, as the text says, you can be guided by the wise. Now, when it comes to the natural world, who are the wise? Well, you know, people are wise about different things. A grand master of chess is wise about chess, but maybe not about cooking. A master chef can be very wise about cooking, but not about chess. So who are the wise when it comes to the natural world? Well, no prizes for guessing nowadays. It's science. So as I pointed out, we've learned a lot about science, about the natural world through science. And modern technology has shown us we can do amazing things. I mentioned some of them, but also we can go to the moon. We can create AI devices which translate between Chinese and English, all kinds of things. And as the English saying goes, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So the fact that we know so much more about the world is verified by the fact that we can do all these amazing things, which could not have been done before. So by the Buddha's own words, who are the wise when it comes to the natural or social world? Well, it's scientists. So you can take the advice of scientists, you should, But in the end, it's got to make sense to you, given the advice of the wise. Okay. So it's not surprising that we see a number of modern Buddhists recognizing this fact. So here's a quote from the current Dalai Lama, Tenzin Gyatso. He says this: if science proves some belief of Buddhism wrong, then Buddhism will have to change. In my view, science and Buddhism share a search for the truth and for understanding of reality. By learning from science about aspects of reality where its understanding may be more advanced, I believe that Buddhism enriches its own worldview. So that's a categorical statement that if Buddhist views are refuted by science, then the Buddhist views have to go. And here's another quote from another modern Buddhist, Thich Nhat Hanh, who talks about the humility in what we believe. So he calls this non-attachment to views. Aware of the suffering created by attachment to views and wrong perceptions, we're determined to avoid being narrow-minded and bound to present views. We shall learn and practice non-attachment from views in order to be open to others' insights and experience. We're aware that knowledge we presently possess is not changeless, absolute truth. Truth is found in life, and we will observe life within and around us in every moment, ready to learn throughout our lives. Okay, so that's two prominent modern Buddhists who are quite clear that if there is a clash between Buddhism and science, then it's the Buddhist views that have to be revised. Okay, now, how much of Buddhism has to be revised in the light of modern science? So let me turn to that question and run through Buddhist views about a few things. Standard views in Buddhism is that reality has three features, aspects, marks. First of all, impermanence, anicca, unsatisfactoriness, dukkha, and no self, anatman, which I've already mentioned. Now, I will come back to dukkha later in the talk, but let's talk about impermanence and no self. So, the standard Buddhist view is that the world is in a constant state of change. Everything comes into existence when conditions or causes are ripe. It maintains itself in existence for a while, and then it goes out of existence when conditions are appropriate, when causes so determine. Now, the Buddhists presumably had this view as a simple induction and observation about the world in which they live. They could see that everything around them started, maintained for a while, and finished. What has science told us about the world? Well, it's very much confirmed this picture. So modern science tells us that the cosmos itself came into existence with the Big Bang. It's evolving all the time. Stars, planets, and so on come into existence. Planets and the environment they provide come into existence. The environment changes. Species and people come into existence, go out of existence. Quantum physics tells us that fundamental particles come into and out of existence. And modern science tells us that the cosmos itself will either go out of existence in the mirror image of the Big Bang, the Big Crunch, or it will expand indefinitely until the average density is as close to zero as you like. So that's as good as going out of existence, because literally there's pretty much nothing left. So it seems that science has actually confirmed impermanence. Okay, let's go on to no self. Anatman. So Atman is a self, and Atman, no self. And the first thing to get your head around about an Atman is what it actually means, because people misunderstand it badly. It does not mean that there are no people. There's a perfectly clear sense in which Buddhism believes in people. They may be conventional existence in a certain sense, but there are people. When Buddhists deny the existence of a self, what they deny is the existence of a part of a person. So that a person does not have a part, which is constant, unchanging, defines that person as that very person, and exists all the time the person exists. So in Western thought, the closest analog of this is the soul. So an Atman is really the view that people don't have souls. So if people don't have souls, what are they? Well, the standard analogy is a chariot, but let's update this a bit. Consider a car. A car has a bunch of parts. They came into existence at a certain time when causes and conditions were ripe. The car maintains its parts for a while. They interact with each other. Some wear out and replaced. The car interacts with the environment, but eventually the parts fall apart, and the car goes out of existence. Well, according to Buddhism, people are like that. Okay, a person's parts are not mechanical or electrical, they're kind of psychological or biological, but the basic story is the same. All right, now, why did the Buddhists believe this? Well, unlike Nietzsche, it wasn't a sort of natural observation about reality, because the view is very uncommonsensical in a way. We all think that we do have a self. We have a sense of meanness. So when you wake up in the morning, this little voice goes on and says, "Hello, back again, it's me," right? So we have this sense of self, but the sense of self is an illusion in a certain sense. We really have no sense. We really have no self to which this sense answers. That's at least the Buddhist view. Why did the Buddhists believe that? Well, they had a bunch of arguments, what we're not going to go into now. But let's just ask the question about to what extent modern science has confirmed this view. Well, I think it stacks up very well against modern theories of anatomy, neuroanatomy, physiology, and so on. So a practicing medic, a doctor, who thought that by opening up your body, you could find your soul, like you could find your gallbladder, wouldn't last long in the profession, right? So the modern science of anatomy seems to have confirmed the Buddhist view. Well, how might you disagree with this? Okay, well, look, where would you look for a soul? It would be crazy to look for it in the body, right? That view is a non-starter. If we have a soul, the natural place to look for it would be in the mind. And as I said, we have a sense of self, and so it's plausible to look there. But you can't find the self in the mind for a very simple reason. Namely, when you're unconscious, when you're knocked out or anesthetized, nothing goes on in your mind, it's a blank. And yet you're still you still exist. So the soul can't be part of consciousness because you can still be you when your consciousness is stopped, at least temporarily. So the self can't be part of consciousness. At best, it can be the sort of potential for having a certain kind of consciousness. But even that seems wrong. So modern studies in cognitive science tell us that even when you're conscious, what you might think of as a self doesn't really exist. So this is a quote from Dan Dennett, who's a modern philosopher, cognitive scientist. And he puts it this way: there's no single definitive stream of consciousness because there's no central headquarters, no Cartesian theatre where it all comes together for the perusal of a central meaner. Instead of such a single stream, however wide, there are multiple channels in which specialized circuits try, in parallel pandemoniums, to do their various things, creating multiple drafts, that is, a narrative of the self as they go. Most of these fragmentary drafts of narrative play short-lived roles in the modulation of current activity, but some get promoted to further functional roles in swift succession by the activity of the virtual machine, which is the brain. The seriality of this machine is not a hardwired design feature, but rather the upshot of a coalition of these specialists. So what Dennett is saying is that there's lots of stuff going on in your brain and your mind. There are lots of things going on in series, going on in parallel, but there's no place where it all comes together, as it were. The anatomy of what's going on is highly distributed, like the cloud, for example, which is a highly distributed system without a central headquarters. Okay, so the Buddhist view of an Atman has actually stood up pretty well to the test of modern science. All right, so that's the good news. Now we're going for time, right? Let's turn to something which might appear to be not such good news. And I guess when it comes to Buddhism, this is the elephant in the room. So, rebirth. As I said, Buddhism developed against orthodox Hindu thinking about the 5th century of the BCE, and it rejected some of the views of Hinduism. But of course, whenever you react against something, you always preserve a certain part of it. And so the Hindus believed in rebirth. When you die, you're reborn. And Buddhism took over this view. So Buddhism subscribes to rebirth. Now, how you understand rebirth exactly when there's no self is a slightly ticklish question. But Buddhists have an answer for this. I'm not going to go into it. What I'm going to do is talk a bit about how this stacks up against modern science. So, what should one make of the view of rebirth from the point of view of modern science? Well, the honest answer is that there really is no belief. There's very little scientific evidence for this. In fact, there's sort of scientific evidence against it, because what we think of as the mind depends very much on the neurology of your brain. And if your brain disappears, your mind disappears too. So there doesn't seem to be much evidence for rebirth, but there could be. Look, this sort of thing could be a common occurrence. Someone is born and they claim to remember a previous life, and maybe they claim something which nobody could have known. Maybe they hid a box somewhere and they say, look, go and look in such and such place, you'll find this box and I'll tell you what's exactly in it. Okay, and then we look and we find it and it's there. So, I mean, this would be empirical proof, or at least evidence for rebirth. And there's virtually no such evidence. Now, the lack of evidence does not show that the view is wrong. It just shows that there's no evidence for it. And as the Scottish philosopher David Hume said, the wise person apportions their beliefs according to the evidence. So if there ain't any evidence, or if there's not substantial evidence, it's not very wise to believe it. Okay. So it seems that the Buddhist view of rebirth runs up against modern science. Okay. That something like rebirth might run up against modern sciences, perhaps not surprising. And one might well put it down to one might put down rebirth to a view of the sort of current worldview of 500 years ago, which has now gone out of, well, for which there's, let me put it this way. One might think of rebirth as simply a cultural accretion to Buddhism inherited from the culture of the day. And it's pretty clear that there are such things. So if you look at Buddhist texts, they hold that in the center of the world, there's a strangely shaped mountain called Mount Sumeru. Of course, most of us write off this view as just early geography or cosmology or something. So that's obviously a cultural accretion. There are more obvious, or there are other cultural accretions. So Buddhism as a religion has been as patriarchal as all the major world religions. So in Indian Buddhism, women cannot achieve enlightenment. They've got to play their cards right and come back as a man, and hopefully they'll do it in another life. The Buddha refused to let women into his Sangha, his community. When some of his monks rebelled, he agreed to have an order of nuns, but he said that they've always got to have a man at the head of the order. Now, officially, Buddhism, there's nothing in Buddhism which is gendered, quite the contrary. So the Buddha himself in one of the sutras says, look, if you look at animals, there are lots of differences between birds and fish and so on, but in people, there's no real difference. Not in the face or the hands or the hair or the head or the color or the sexual organs. These are not significant differences. So sort of officially, Buddhist philosophy is gender neutral. But as I said, as a religion, Buddhism has been as patriarchal as all the major world religions. So it's natural to think of this as a cultural accretion, even one to which the Buddha was subject. Okay, so let me not give you the sutra where he says that. Okay, so it's natural to think that rebirth is a kind of cultural accretion which can happily be dispensed with. Okay, however, there is a certain problem with this, and it's as follows. So let's talk about the other mark of reality, which I mentioned, namely dukkha. So dukkha is this Sanskrit word, often translated as suffering, but it has multiple resonances. Suffering, pain, discontent, unsatisfactoriness, unhappiness, sorrow, affliction, anxiety, dissatisfaction, discomfort, anguish, stress, misery, frustration. In other words, all the things you really love in life, okay? And the First Noble Truth says, well, life's like that. Everyone gets ill. If they're old enough, if they're lucky enough, they get old and infirm. If they're unlucky, they die earlier. They lose valued things, maybe family members, body parts. They lose their job, and so on and so forth. This is a fact of life, and this is the First Noble Truth. Now, the Buddha wasn't an idiot. He knew that life contains good things too. There are joys of those we love, of music we love, of the joys of being compassionate to people. But these often come with an edge, because the good things in life are transient. All things are impermanent. We lose them, and when we lose them, we're upset. Our marriage breaks up, we lose our job, we get upset. And often in the back of our mind, even when we have something good, we know that we can lose it. And there's insecurity and the worry that it'll go. Think about jealousy or rivalry at work or whatever. And often when we really get something we really want, we find it's not satisfying in the way that we'd hoped. So even the good things in life have an edge. Now, sometimes Buddhism is often thought of as a pessimistic view because of the First Noble Truth. That's actually wrong. It's realistic. It says, look, dukkha is a fact of life, get your head around it. But the good news in Buddhism is there's something you can do about this. You can change yourself in order to get rid of or at least minimize your dukkha. Okay, so that's the good news, as it were. Okay, what's this got to do with rebirth? Well, I've described the sort of cardinal features of some of the Buddha's basic teachings. Now, I've described it in entirely negative terms. The point of being a Buddhist is getting rid of dukkha. That is, it's eliminating a negative. So, look, if there's an easy way to eliminate the negative, commit suicide. Or, since compassion is a central Buddhist virtue, it will be a good thing to go around killing people. Now, that's just crazy. Okay. Now, if you believe in rebirth, there is an obvious reply to this, because shooting yourself or killing other people is not going to help, because once you die, you're going to come back and do it again and again and again and again and again and again and again until finally you get it right and you achieve enlightenment. So the reason you might think that rebirth is not simply a cultural accretion is that it's the only way of answering this obvious objection. All right, that's a good thought, but it's not conclusive because there is another way of looking at matters. So Buddhism can't simply be about the elimination of a negative. It's got to be about the accentuation of a positive. What is that? Well, the Buddhist tradition is actually quite explicit on this. It's the kind of flip side of dukkha. And the Sanskrit word is apechka. Difficult to translate, but it means something like peace of mind. So you know peace of mind is a good thing. When you have peace of mind, you know that it feels good. And moreover, it helps you to do other things. If you have peace of mind, you can listen to music, you can be compassionate to people, you can do all sorts of things which are good as well. So peace of mind is a good in itself, and it's a good for what it can bring. And so if you think that the feature of the Buddhist path is not simply the elimination of a negative, but the accentuation of a positive, then that provides an alternative answer to the question of why you shouldn't go around simply committing suicide or killing people, precisely because this terminates upekkha. Here's what one contemporary Buddhist says about upekkha. The real meaning of upekkha, that's the Pali rather than the Sanskrit. The real meaning of upekkha is equanimity, not indifference in the sense of unconcern for others. As a spiritual virtue, upekkha means equanimity in the face of the fluctuations of worldly fortune. It's evenness of mind unshakable freedom of mind, a state of inner equipoise that cannot be upset by gain and loss, honor and dishonor, praise and blame, pleasure and pain. Upekkha is freedom from all points of self-reference. It is indifference only to the demands of the ego self, with a craving for pleasure and position, not to the well-being of one's fellow human beings. Okay, we won't bother about the rest of the quote. So, rebirth is a pretty important part of traditional Buddhism. I don't know of any Indian Buddhist traditions that deny it. Most Chinese Buddhist traditions also endorse it, although it's kind of irrelevant to most of Zen Buddhism. But even though it's a fairly well entrenched part of Buddhist philosophy and religion, I think it has to go in the light of modern science. So let me just say a few words about essentialism, and I'll tell you what that means in a minute, and then we'll wind up. So, as I said, rebirth does seem to be, or have been, an important part of Buddhist thought. And if you ask some Buddhists, they will tell you, well, if it ain't got rebirth, it ain't Buddhism. You're not talking about Buddhism anymore, you're talking about something else. But the fact that it has been a traditional part of Buddhist thought does not settle the matter, even by the Buddha's own words. Remember the Kalama Sutra, where he says it's got to stack up against what wisdom about the world tells us. So what's one to make of the claim that without rebirth, it's not Buddhism? Well, I think that that's just a mistaken view. It's to read a kind of essentialism into Buddhism. It's to say that there are certain things which make Buddhism, without which a Buddhist view, without which a view cannot be Buddhism. Okay, as I say, this is a view called essentialism. And if you look at what's happened to Buddhism over the last 2,500 years, as I said, there are many different schools of Buddhism. Many things have changed in the process, just as they have in Christianity. Buddhism is what it was, what it became, and what it will be. And as Buddhism moves into the West, I think a lot of Western Buddhists have concluded that Buddhism is not really committed to the necessity of rebirth. If that's right, then these sort of essentialist readings of Buddhism are wrong. If you want a way of thinking about the various Buddhist traditions, rather than the essentialist view, I think a much more sensible view is to think of the various different Buddhist schools as something that Wittgenstein in the Philosophical Investigations called a family resemblance. So if you consider a bunch of people in an extended family, they'll have similarities and differences. There's maybe nothing that goes across every person, but the similarities define it as this kind of family resemblance. And I rather think that's a much more sensible way of looking at religions, including Buddhism, than in this essentialist version. And if you think that Buddhism itself endorses the contingencies of change, then I think this is even a very natural way of looking at Buddhism from a Buddhist perspective. So anyway, look, I've told you a certain take on Buddhism. I've told you that much of it stacks up much of ancient Buddhism stacks up well against modern science. Some of it doesn't, particularly rebirth, but that has to go, I think, in modern Buddhism. And that is a perfectly coherent view, contrary to what you might have thought before I started this evening's talk. So that's the end of this talk. All things are impermanent, and this talk is no exception. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope you've found it interesting, whether or not you agree. And now I'm very happy to listen to your thoughts and have a chat about them. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. There's my students clapping in the background. Let's open it up to questions. If you want to ask the question in verbally, you can use the raise hand function. We have one question already in chat from Derek, so we can start with that. Derek writes, I'm curious if Graham is coming at this from a purely philosophical or intellectual perspective, or has deeper personal meditative insights to compare his research with experience. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. No, look, I'm not a practicing Buddhist. I'm a philosopher. That's my religion, if you like. Okay. I've never seriously practiced meditation. Meditation is important in Buddhism, mainly because, well, for two reasons at least. Firstly, because it's a way of changing your personality to get rid of dukkha. And whether that is the case is currently the subject of scientific investigation. So there's in Carolina, there's the Mind and Life Institute, where Buddhists and scientists have been coming together to explore the results of meditation. So that's one way in which Buddhism and modern science are interacting very closely. Another important point of meditation, especially in the Chinese Buddhist tradition, is it gives you immediate experience of what reality is like. So the standard story is that we all have a mistaken view of what reality is really like, often provided by false conceptualization. And meditation is claimed by many Buddhists to give you a direct insight into the nature of reality, knowledge by acquaintance rather than knowledge by description, to put it in Western philosophical terms. Now, I can't claim any knowledge of meditation and its effects. I'm happy to listen to those people who have investigated these things seriously. As far as I can tell, whatever the result of that, I don't think it's going to affect what I've said today. But the results are certainly highly interesting.
Thanks. I think the next person up in the queue is Joseph Frankel. Do you want to unmute yourself, Joseph?
Hello,
Yes.
Joseph. I know you.
Hi. Okay, I'm glad I know you. Okay, the question I'm going to ask, I'm not an expert at all in it, but I still want to raise it. I think in physics we have something which is called presentism, where physics believes that there's no past and there's no future. It's only what we have now. And then we have a black universe, where I think the second there was the Big Bang, everything from beginning to end is already there. Does that touch a little bit with the Buddhist views of nothing exists? Because if we have a black universe, everything seems to exist in a very strong way.
Okay, look, this is a really good question and a hard question, because we're talking about views of time. And in Western philosophy, there are basically two views of the nature of time. One believes in the flow of time and one doesn't. And the one you've described is the one that doesn't. And that's typically the view you find in the special theory of relativity. So it's probably the most scientific of the views, although it's not universally agreed even by some scientists, I think. And the question is, how does that relate to the Buddhist view of time? And that's where it gets tricky, because there are different views about time in Buddhism. The old, I think the more traditional view of time in Buddhism is that time flows. And so this doesn't fit so well with the block universe view that you described. But then, how do you fit the phenomenology of the flow of time into block universe? I don't think anyone has a good answer to that, even the hardcore scientists. So it may well be that we've got to revise our scientific thinking as well to take this on board. I think that's still a very live option. But it's more complicated than that because Buddhists do have different views of time. And there is certainly some Buddhist views which do endorse something like the block universe. So there's a school of Buddhism called Huayan, and I know you know about that, according to which everything interpenetrates with everything else. Every element of the natural world encodes every other. And if you read the text, especially people like Dogen, this goes for all instants of time as well. So past and present and future all sort of coexist with this interdependence. And if you look at that, then it's not so different from the block universe. So your question is difficult to answer just because, as I said, Buddhists disagree about many things, and the nature of time is one of these.
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. Dipanwada, hi.
Hi, do you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
Professor Prest, I have a question which is kind of similar to the question that you already answered. One is, of course, I think you are trying to devise a framework where a modern scientific person who holds generally scientific worldviews can also embrace Buddhism and not run into any contradictions. And there is a very simple way to do that, that such a person could realize Nirvana within one lifetime. And I think in the very early time, in Buddha's own time, the idea was that the Nirvana could be achieved one lifetime, within a single lifetime. And that's what led to this huge embrace of monasticism by younger people. Because if you remember, the Vedic tradition never encouraged the people in the second stage of life become monks. It is the Buddhism which started these huge monasteries and led these enormous communities of monks. So such a Western person could do that, could realize Nirvana one lifetime. In that case, I think your project will be successful. But then there arises the other problem. And here I'm really thinking of Darwin, not the Buddhist, because Darwin's scheme also needed enormous time frame. And as you pointed out, the project of Nirvana may or may not be realized within one lifetime. It too needs an enormous time scale. And there is a discontinuity between the quality of experience before Nirvana and after Nirvana. And that might lead us a revision to the demand that everything should be realized within the flowing time experience of one life.
Okay, look, that's very interesting. Okay, so first point, in traditional Buddhism, is it held that you can attain enlightenment in one lifetime? Look, I know of no Buddhist texts that say this. Maybe that's just my ignorance. But I think the standard assumption is it's going to take a long time and many rebirths and many kalpas. But there may be some Buddhist traditions, Indian Buddhist traditions, which say it can be achieved in a lifetime. You find something like that in some of the Chinese Buddhisms, which say people can have enlightenment experiences once or many times in this life. So there are at least certain Buddhist schools who might suggest that enlightenment can be achieved in this lifetime. That's the first part of your question. And if you know of Indian Buddhist texts which say that you can achieve enlightenment in a lifetime. I'd very much like to know that, so please tell me where to look. Now, for the second part, let's suppose there's no such thing as rebirth. Let's suppose that it's very unlikely that you're going to achieve enlightenment in one lifetime. I mean, it is hard. Does that mean that most people will not achieve enlightenment, nirvana, if you like? Yeah, I think it does. Does that deprive Buddhism of a point? No, because dukkha is bad and upekkha is good. And so even if you cannot have a complete dukkha-free existence, the less there is of dukkha and the more there is of upekkha, the better. So it still makes sense to, as it were, tread the Buddhist path, just because it's a way of making life better, if not perfect. And let me just finally observe that I don't know of any Buddhist texts that say that everybody is going to achieve enlightenment. There are Buddhist texts that say everybody can achieve enlightenment, but I don't know of any Buddhist texts which say that everybody will achieve enlightenment. Okay, that may just be my ignorance again, but those are my thoughts in reply to your two-part question. And if you want to come back on that, please feel free.
Yeah, I have a quick follow-up on that. I think most Indian system, and you said that Buddhism is really shares the nature with many Indian systems. The idea is that, the idea is that everybody sooner or later in one of the births will achieve moksha nibbana. But if you forbid that, I'm afraid that you are turning it into a kind of Christianity when some people will be saved and others will be damned.
Oh, I think this is quite different from Christianity, because if you can achieve enlightenment, you achieve it in this life, as did the Buddha. So I'm certainly not suggesting, I'm certainly not trying to turn it into Christianity, which is a totally different kettle of fish. It is true that the story I'm telling is a way of making it compatible with modern science. Now that's certainly true. I personally don't see that as a problem for reasons I've explained. But some people may well disagree about this, and that's fine. There's no reason why everyone has to come to the same conclusion. As I said, I'm giving you a sort of perspective, and I understand that people may disagree on this.
Thanks. I guess I'll give myself another question, although we just got one in chat, but I'll give myself a question first. One of the things that's always sort of hard when you're trying to tell whether science contradicts, say, common sense or conventional wisdom is that the results of science are often expressed in some sort of technical, formal language, and conventional wisdom is expressed in like vernacular English, let's say. And in order for two things to sort of logically contradict each other, their vocabularies need to overlap, but that doesn't happen between these technical languages and vernacular languages. And there are a lot of details to go in here. It's a really thorny problem, but I don't know how do you have any sort of practical guidance about that, or what to do, how to establish something like logical relationships between the results of modern science often expressed in mathematical terms, and the doctrines of Buddhism often expressed in their own technical vocabulary.
No, that's an interesting question. Look, certainly modern science is often explained in technical terms with lots of neologisms and so on. And as you just pointed out, so is Buddhism. Buddhism has its own lingo for all kinds of things. And of course, that's complicated. There's an extra degree of complication because most of the texts are in Sanskrit or classical Chinese. And so you've got the problem of translating this into other languages, Western languages, for example. Now, although both views are expressed with a lot of technicality, I think that what's important can often be expressed in the vernacular of whoever you're talking to. So, you know, a scientist can explain the really important ideas. And what you see with good scientists is precisely they can explain quite difficult scientific ideas. Okay, they can't do all the details and the mathematics and so on, but they can get the main ideas across and explain in terms that are intelligible to a lay person. So, you know, when medical science explains its views to people about vaccination or whatever, they can do this in terms which are quite intelligible. And the same is true of Buddhism. So if Buddhists are talking to sort of other Buddhists, they'll use all the jargon, but they don't have to. They can do it in perfectly good sort of common sense terms. And the master of this is the Dalai Lama. So it's possible, I think, for the two technical systems to meet at least sufficiently to engage, precisely because thoughtful people can take one of the technical systems and explain it in ordinary common sense terms, whether that's English or German or China, I don't know, Urdu or Swahili.
We have a question in chat and also a question that one of my students just asked me off camera, which are very similar. So the question in chat is, for at least a century, Western thinkers have posited that Buddhism is a scientific body of thought. And implicit in this is that Buddhism can be separated from other religious traditions and their benighted superstitions. But Buddhism, as it is practiced, has always had an element of faith, whether in karma or rebirth or an elaborate pantheon or unconditioned enlightenment, etc. Why are we in the West compelled to force Buddhism into a scientific model? Why, after all, is Buddhism legitimate or not, depending on the degree to which it's scientific? And the related question which my student asked is just like, well, a lot of these doctrines sort of sound just that you're talking about, they sort of sound just as sort of empirical or just as scientific in nature as, you know, a lot of Christian tradition or something like that. So is there anything more genuinely more scientific about Buddhism than about other religious traditions?
Okay. So, I mean, there's several things going on there. If you look at believers of religions, most believers of religions believe as a matter of faith. So most Buddhists grew up in a Buddhist culture. Most Muslims grew up in Islamic culture. Most Christians grew up in a Christian culture. Why do they have those views? Well, it's because they were taught to believe them by their parents or their priests or their Roshi or whoever, okay? And most people are not thoughtful people. They're not, well, they may be thoughtful people, but they don't think much about their religious beliefs. And they believe them simply because they're told, and they say, well, you know, I have faith that this is right. That's certainly true. That's true of all religions. But when you get people who start to think about the religions, they may be theologians, they may be philosophers, then they will be concerned with the ground of their beliefs. They're not simply content to believe something simply because some smart guy told them, right? It's got to stack up, and that will be true whether you're a Christian theologian, a Buddhist philosopher, or whatever. And so, yeah, faith plays a role in religion, of course it does, but sort of what we're talking about, or what I've been talking about, is what a thoughtful person will make of these religious views when they start to scrutinize what they are, what evidence there is for them, and so on. That's part of the answer. Okay, second thing. There was a suggestion that I'm shoehorning Buddhism into science. Now, that's a way of putting it, but it's not really fair. I started by pointing out that many modern Buddhists, including very traditional Buddhists like the Dalai Lama, say, look, we have a bunch of beliefs, and if there's a conflict between our Buddhist beliefs and science, well, then, the science, generally speaking, should take precedence. So I'm not just selling Buddhists to go this way. Many Buddhists are going that way, and some don't. That's fine. Buddhists can disagree about these things. As I've said, there's no uniquely right answer to what Buddhism is. Now, is there something particularly unique to Buddhism which makes it suitable for this attitude of learning from science? Yes, I think there is. And that's where I sort of started talking. Because if you believe that there's an almighty God who knows everything, okay, you can take the Bible or the Quran or the Gita or whatever, and you can interpret it metaphorically. As many Christians and Muslims and Hindus do. You can always reinterpret scriptures. But what you cannot do is say, God got it wrong. That's out. Because there's no God in Buddhism, you're not forced to say God got it wrong. Buddhism has always been very strong on understanding the world, on the way that the causes and effects work in the world. And that makes it reasonable to take the attitude that if our understanding of the world is wrong in some respects and science gives us a better understanding, then it's reasonable to accept science. So that's sort of three thoughts about the questions you sort of phrased. And it may well be that people will want to come back on these things. They're contentious.
Great. Derek writes in chat, I think, broadly in the same spirit. The Buddha has denounced blind faith, sada, and pointed out that it cannot help his follower in any way in his self-purification. He always emphasized that one should believe in his teaching only after having understood it. He often praised the one who is endowed with confidence based on knowledge, refer to the Kalama Sutta. So yeah, there's this sort of, it's imposing sort of high evidential standards or something like that isn't like an imposition from the outside. I suppose part of the idea is that this is something that's intrinsic to Buddhist tradition.
Yeah, I think that's right. Of course, you've got to remember that most people who are Buddhists do believe these things. I mean, not necessarily with that attitude, but that's religion for you. We're not then talking about simply looking at the grounds of belief.
Certainly asks in chat. I think you addressed the question during the talk, but it's worth underlining. If Buddhists reject the view of rebirth, does it commit them to a view that affirms that the best or even the good way to solve the problem of dukkha is through suicide? So maybe this is a good opportunity to clarify some of your remarks about upeksha and sort of positive good there.
Yeah. Okay. So if you think that Buddhism is entirely about the elimination of a negative, then you don't believe in rebirth, then there's an easier way of doing it. Shoot yourself, shoot everybody else. That's an act of compassion. Okay, that's wacky. Okay, no Buddhist is going to go there. So Buddhism cannot be about simply the elimination of a negative. It's got to be about the accentuation of a positive. And the Buddhist tradition itself says what that is. It's this attitude of upekkha or pekka, whether you want to put it in Sanskrit or Pali. And as a first cut, that's an attitude of peace of mind. Peace of mind is good in itself. You know that when you experience it, but it's also good for what it can do to you. So you will have the other good things in life better if you have peace of mind. if you're listening to great music and you're worrying about what your kids are up to or what the pain you've been experiencing means, then you don't have peace of mind, and it ruins the music or anything else we love, okay? So, Upecha, peace of mind, is good in itself and good for what it does to other things. So, my old mate Jay Garfield put it to me this way once, and I think he was dead right. Buddhism does not free you from life, it frees you for life. So if you look at Buddhism in that way, then there's no temptation to think that committing suicide is a good thing, because you're stopping a good thing, namely peace of mind and all the other joys of life that it makes possible. So that's my reply.
Thanks. So I got another question from one of my students off camera. So Buddhism is a practice as well as a sort of tradition of inquiry. And, you know, we're living through unusual times that might require some sort of spiritual exercise or some sort of practice, which, you know, helps us navigate them. And the question is just like, has Buddhism done that? I know you're not a practicing Buddhist, but has your study of this done that for you? I mean, I might add just like a little follow-up. I think like in the last few years, we've seen like Stoicism become very popular, like all this popular writing about Stoicism. And I think part of that is that like, there's sort of neurotic times, right? There are times where people are sort of, their attention and their emotions are sort of pulled in a lot of different directions. And Stoicism is a tradition which promises some kind of like emotional self-regulation. And Buddhism is not dissimilar in that respect. Yeah, I mean, if Buddhism has given you any kind of practical insight into how to navigate, you know, the pandemic, among other things, has it been through that? Sort of teachings about self-regulation?
Okay, interesting question. Look, first of all, Buddhism, that life is dukkha, is the first noble truth. But there are three more. Dukkha is caused by many things, but probably the only one you have any control over is your mental state, your attachment aversion. Let's just call it attachment. You know, you want the shit things to go away, you want the good things to continue. That's all in your mind. And then the fourth noble truth tells you a bunch of things you can do to help you change your mindset. You know, and there's a bunch of things about sort of living morally, and then understanding the world, and then being aware of, being mindful about your place in the world, so to speak. This is called the Eightfold Noble Path. And the most important thing about this is to help you to achieve non-attachment about the things that happen. You know, if shit happens, well, you can't do much about that, but what you can do something about is, hey, look at it. And non-attachment is a virtue in a number of Greek philosophies too. You mentioned Stoicism, but in fact, you find it in all the Hellenic philosophies: Stoicism, Skepticism, Epicureanism. So the Buddhist, that bit of the Buddhist view is found in a number of worldviews, okay? And that's fine. If it's good, why shouldn't it occur to different people at different times, different places? So that's part of your question. Now, the other part of your question was addressed to me specifically. Has it helped me to cope with life? I'm not a practicing Buddhist, but I guess I'd kind of think of myself as a fellow traveler. So there is a great deal of Buddhist philosophy that I think gets it absolutely dead right. And the Four Noble Truths are a place where I think Buddhism gets it dead right. So do I try to practice non-attachment? Yeah, I do. Does it help me to feel a lot less angst and anger and so on when things go wrong? Well, I think so. Do I think that the Buddha got these things right? Yeah. Do I try and be aware of the consequence of my actions? Am I mindful? Well, I try to be. I mean, I might not be very good at it, but all these aspects of Buddhist ethics, I think, I agree with. And to the extent that I'm able to, I do try to put them into practice. And I do find that maybe life isn't quite so bad as it would be otherwise.
Excellent. That is a great note, I think, to end on. So I think we can call it there. Thank you so much. For those of you still in the audience, the next Philosophy in the Library talk is coming up on November 16th. Kelly Dine, who's a philosopher who works on, among other things, the philosophy of neural representation in ants and how bees communicate through flying around, and other ways that information is encoded in weird sorts of biological systems. We'll be talking, I don't have the title for the talk yet, so I don't know if he'll be talking about that work, but Kelly Dine does really interesting work also as a fiction writer. That's November 16th, probably still on Zoom at 7 p.m. So clear your calendar, tell your friends, shout it from the rooftops, and I will see you there. Again, thank you so much, Graham. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. And peace and love and joy to everybody here. Good night.
All right.